Have you ever noticed the more you try, the less you get? For example, you're constantly trying to be happy, but you feel more and more miserable the harder you try to get out of it. You try to get people to like you at work, and the more you seem like a try-hard, and people keep pulling away from you. Or, for example, in business, you're trying incredibly hard to get new clients, but yet they seem to all just want to work with someone else. Alan Watts calls this the backwards law, and there's a quote that he's mostly famous for, and it goes something like this. The more you pursue feeling better all the time, the less satisfied you become, as pursuing something only reinforces the fact that you lack it in the first place. Now, I know what you're thinking. What the fuck does that even mean? If you're anything like me, you're inundated with gurus telling us that we need to work harder, and that's the reason we don't get what we want. We have to work harder, grind harder, hustle harder, and eventually, if you put enough effort in, just maybe you might get what you want. We've all tried that, and yet and still, we keep doing it for some reason, despite the fact that it's not working anymore. So let's break down the backwards law, and most importantly, let's figure out how we can actually apply this to our everyday life. And in this video later on, I'm going to explain the only one scenario that I've come up with that could possibly disprove the backwards law. He has a name, and it's David Goggins. We'll get to him in a minute. Now, I first heard about the backwards law years ago when I was talking to a friend of mine who was a multimillionaire, and he tried to explain this concept to me through a story. He said at one point in his life, he felt like he was in the middle of the ocean with a boat with a huge motor on top of it. He was revving it as hard as he could go, and he was going pretty fast. At this point in his life, he's already made about $1 million, but he's grinding. He's living the American dream, as most people call it, and he is but there's one downside to it. The harder he pushed himself, the more his relationships get strained. The less his clients seem to like him. And slowly but surely, he begins to burn out. I think we've all been there at some point or another. So he tries out an experiment. He wants to do the backwards law. He starts to try to not try so hard. He lets off the gas and he said, I started to feel the boat, the motor, that everything slowed down and I started to panic. I wasn't making as much money, but I started to notice my relationships were a little bit better. So I kept it going, but my boat slowly but surely came to a stop. This is when the panic set in the most. But, as luck would have it, all of a sudden, without his motor being on, without him straining, his boat began to go turn a little bit faster until finally his boat was moving faster than it ever had been. And of course, this is an analogy, and really what that means is not only was his relationships better, but his business grew 10x. Now, in this analogy, he looked up one day and realized that the entire time he had sails on the boat. Turns out, life, universe, whatever you want to call it, was guiding him through the entire way. By not trying as hard, he actually got more. And I think inherently we all know this to be true. Since we're sticking with the business analogy, let's talk sales for a minute. Have you ever been around a salesperson that constantly is pushing you to get to the close? They want to get the commission. You can smell the commission breath off of their face, and eventually go, no, this is not for me. Maybe it could have been, but the salesperson was really just trying too damn hard. The truth of the matter is, had they pulled back and done this one thing, you probably would have moved with them, which was detaching from the outcome. You see, what we're saying here is not to try at all, but in fact, just care less about the outcome. In this book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck, Mark Manson talks about this idea of detaching from the outcome. And in truth, it's the detaching from the outcome that gets you your actual result. It's somewhere in the middle of avoidance and now, most people when they hear this, say this one comment, well, what am I supposed to do? Just not try? Just give up and then eventually I'll get what I want? No, Momo, that's not what I'm saying. What we're saying is just to not care about the outcome. If we take that same business analogy we were giving earlier, if that salesperson just didn't care if you bought from them or not, and just did everything they could to show why they could help you, probably would have closed. If Pepe Le Pew didn't care about the outcome and about getting his kisses from the cat, he wouldn't have been such a perv. And maybe the cat would have looked at him and said, hey, even though you're a skunk, I like you. That's kind of a throwback analogy. I think I might keep that in. Avoidance isn't the answer, but neither is trying too hard. And like I mentioned earlier, there is one person that might just put a hinder in this idea of the backwards law. That's David Goggins. Now, David Goggins is famous for trying as hard as you possibly can and getting a result. Doesn't matter what the outcome is. It doesn't matter what it costs you physically. Your knees can be blown out, all of that. You just have to try harder and grit through it. However, if you've ever done anything physically demanding, like running long periods of time, but most of us haven't. But I'm just going to use what I've done, which is, for example, doing jujitsu. In jujitsu, the harder you try, the more your technique goes out the window. The more your technique goes out the window, the worse it gets for you, and eventually you get choked out. Or worse, someone just lays on top of you and you wish you would just quit. There is another way though. You just don't care about the outcome. You settle in and you just go into almost a flow state. An example of this, in my gym, at one point in time, we did this drill. We had to roll, we call it, do jujitsu, with a new person coming in every single minute for an hour. After 10 minutes, you're exhausted. You want to give up and you think to yourself, maybe I should try harder. I should push myself to get to that hour. Or instead, you do what is the smart path and you do what the backwards law tells us to do, which is detach from the outcome. And at that point, I just kind of almost got into a meditative state, made it all the way through that hour. And then next thing you know, I realized it was all over. The point is, David Goggins, in my humble opinion, and nobody can really get in the man's head, only he can. The truth of the matter is, I don't think he's really gritting his teeth and getting through anything. What he's actually doing is just accepting what is. When he's going on these long runs and his shins hurt and his knees are messed up and he has to run for 250,000 miles, he just accepts what is and just keeps going despite it. It's not a matter of gritting, because if he was about just grinding through the pain, his heart rate would elevate, which would make him actually strain harder, which would make his body collapse much sooner. He couldn't make it through the 250 million thousand miles he has to run. So, kind of proves the point. To get what you want, you have to let go. In life, it's really, really hard to let go. I'm fully aware of that. When you're in a really, really bad mood, you don't want to be in a bad mood anymore, and you try your hardest to get out of it. But as luck would have it, the way to actually get out of that bad mood is to stop trying to get out of the bad mood. The best way for trying to create content, you're trying to be a writer, but you have writer's block. The best way to get out of writer's block isn't necessarily to keep writing. It's to step away from it and go to experience something so you can have something to write about or something to make a video about. The more and more people that I meet, whether it's entrepreneurs or just really, really happy individuals, have this "it is what it is" mentality. And I think there's something to it. I think if we have more of this "it is what it is" mentality, and importantly we meet, we might just be a little bit happier for it. But what do I know? Let me know in the comments what you think about this concept of the backwards law. Does it make sense, and can we apply it to our daily lives? With that being said, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching as always, and I will catch you in the next video.